upstairs is having to turn people away when they ask about their own books, how to take care of them and things. And, it's something that we feel very strongly about, but it's hard because we don't have the time and space to do it ourselves. But oh, we want you to take care of those books. That led me to ask Paul to join us tonight. Paul Boncella is a conservator at the Birmingham Public Library downtown. He works in the gorgeous historic building that is adjacent to Lynn Park. And as I just found out that if you're in the new part of the building and you want to get to Southern history, you can ask permission and go to it's not open to the general public at this moment, but you can access it. And a wealth of information is there, not just Southern history. The archives are there, beautiful murals, and a lot of genealogy research goes on there. Probably the best place in the Southeast that I would say. I'm not biased at all. And Paul comes to us from a music background. His prior career was many degrees, organ performance. And he has taught musicology and been a concert organist all over the world. And in 2012, he put that aside to, I think you had been working a little bit with Birmingham Public, started getting into this, and he became a conservator and is doing that full time. Are you in charge of the map collection, or there is a huge, phenomenal map collection over at Birmingham Public, and Paul does that too. We can talk a little bit about that. And he is also in charge of doing a lot of the genealogy classes. If you ever want to find out anything that he has on tap, and they are starting with in-person programming also. The Birmingham Public Library has their own Facebook page and website where you can see their schedule, so you can learn more. We did invite a few people to bring items, and I'm sorry we couldn't get everybody's items. Hopefully they are representative of some of your needs. So I will turn it over to Paul. Thank you so much for coming, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to learn a lot too. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thank you very much for inviting me. And thank all of you who submitted photos for me, because you actually determined the content of the repair section of this program today. And thanks to those who also brought them in for me to have a look at them. There's quite a difference between a photo and what you see in person. And so it's very revealing. So this evening, our agenda is we're going to spend a little bit of time on book storage. And then we'll get into the repair section based on the volumes that I have here. And finally, we'll take some time to identify books that should not be repaired by the do-it-yourselfer. Okay, even though you may be capable or think yourself capable, there are certain things that you simply should not touch. And I'll tell you about them. Okay, let's start with book storage. Environment is a really important thing. And I remember a number of years ago, one of my colleagues was looking through this old decorating magazine from the 50s or the 60s or something. And it showed this really charming room that was filled with all sorts of nice stuff. It looked really cozy and inviting. It had bookcases all around the walls, about this high up off the ground. And some of them were over radiators. The room had windows all the way around it, and all the bookcases had plants on top of them. So there are three things right there that books do not need. They do not need direct sunlight. They don't need to be on top of a heat source, and they also don't need the threat of extra moisture around them. That promotes mold and all that sort of thing. That picture was really fabulous. We couldn't find it, but anyway, I'm not doing a PowerPoint this evening, so I'm off the hook on that. But if I ever find it, I'm going to make sure we post it on our Facebook page. It's everything that you should not do with them. Also, books need ventilation. So the basement is not a good place to store them unless it's, like a regular floor of your house. The garage, closets, attics, that sort of thing. Don't store them in boxes, and don't store them in closed rooms. I know people have these extra rooms that they only use once in a great while, and the door is always closed in there. The air in there is stagnant, moisture stays in there, it doesn't get to move around, and there's mold and mildew everywhere. Okay, you don't actually have to add let's say yeast to your bread dough. There's enough yeast floating around that after a number of days, the bread will actually rise on its own. Same thing with wine and so on. And there's mold and fungus all over the place, and all you need to activate it is moisture. Okay, so avoid that sort of a thing. Okay, shelving. When I took the job in the Southern History Department, people brought these books to me to be repaired, and I was noticing that there was a pattern to these things. And I got smart after a while. Rather than accepting the book right on the spot and saying, okay, I'm going to do something with it, what I did instead was took a look at the call number, went to the shelf where it was stored, and I usually found out exactly why it had been damaged. One of the problems with shelving books, especially in a library, there's not enough room. Sometimes collections grow way faster than people can find shelf space for them. And so in our department, there was a time when the books were coming in like a cart or two a month of them. There were just so many books, and they were just squeezing them onto the shelves. And squeezing books onto the shelves actually has consequences for them. One of the things that happens very frequently, and this happens, okay, let me just orient myself. Okay, what happens with is when someone goes to take a book off the shelf, what they normally do is they grab it at the top. Mm-hmm. And if it's really stuck in there, this is what is going to happen. The spine comes off. And we have lots of books like this in the library that are in this condition because they were shelved too tightly. Also, when you're in a library and you want to get a book off the shelf, if you're tall enough to do so and the shelving is a little bit tight, reach over the top of it and pull it this way here and get it out that way. Another thing that happens in a tight shelving situation is that people have to jam the book into the space for it. And that has consequences for it too. This is what happens to books that are pushed too hard. Their joints break on the inside, and you'll see this in books, and that's usually the cause of it. They're pushed like this. So what I did was I have spent a lot of time over the years correcting the shelving, standardizing it, and so on. And now the books, I have very few of them to repair, and I can focus on rebuilding the books in our collection because our collection is a permanent collection. So the books that go in there are going to stay there until the end of the time, or until we digitize them and finally do without physical books altogether. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but yeah, librarians are all saying it's not going to happen. Conservators are saying, no, digitize, you discard. Not everything, of course. But anyway, also when you're shelving books, books of similar size should be shelved together. Okay, so books of similar size, and you can stand them up if they are supported like this. If one is way bigger than another, let's say, and I'll take this book for example, I'm not going to lift up the whole book, but this would not be a good pairing with this one here because this book is no longer supported anymore. Okay, and it could warp, and it's not a good thing. So if you're going to store books upright, make sure they're of similar size together. If one is way bigger than the other or way smaller than the other, find a separate place to store them. Also, big books, their natural posture is lying down. Okay, and this sort of a book, this is an extremely heavy book, and we have dozens of these books at the Birmingham Public Library. They are our city directories. We have a collection that goes back to 1884, and those books we do have to store them upright because we just wouldn't have enough room for them otherwise. But they're very well shelved and well taken care of and well labeled, so it works out perfectly okay. But normally, big books should be lying down. Okay, factors that promote damage and decay in books. First of all, things that bug me, but the rest of the world doesn't even think about. Such things as poor design, experimental design, and bad manufacture. I think people have forgotten how to make books, because when I got these books from the dollar store for this presentation, and that's what you should do if you're going to do any book repairs yourself, get something that you don't care about, that isn't worth anything, and experiment on that before you do anything with the real thing. So please do that. But when I look at these things, they're not very well built. They are hard to open. The spines don't function the way they're supposed to, and so on. And books that are have experimental designs, or someone decided this was a good idea, or wouldn't it be nice if I put a piece of cardboard on the spine and made it perfectly stiff, and so on. Those things, they don't work well. And so that's, if sometimes you will buy a book, especially a recent book, you won't be able to keep it together. And the reason is it's simply very badly constructed. So there's nothing that you can do about it. Now, big books tend to break more than smaller books. Books like that, like the city directories. What happens with those is that people were, in the past, before they were properly labeled and properly shelved, what I did with those, so people could access them easily and without breaking them. People would on occasion drop them on the floor, and they would just break right out of the case. Okay, it doesn't take very much because they're very, very heavy, and I've seen them break apart. Oh, back to the bad manufacture. Just a little while after I took the job at the Birmingham Public Library, one of my colleagues was carrying a pile of books, and a new book like this fell off the pile. It hit the ground, and the text block just popped right out of the covers of the book. And that's because it was just a very badly built book. Another enemy of books is age, and age is the enemy of everything, unfortunately. And sometimes you just won't be able to do anything to save a book. They simply do deteriorate over time. And the invisible enemy of books is acid. You don't see the acid, you won't see evidence of it all the time, but acid is there. Ever since they started making book using wood pulp rather than cloth fibers, paper has been decaying, and they noticed this very quickly within a few decades of it. You know what it's like if you have an old newspaper that you saved. After 20 years, it turns brown and is almost illegible, and then it starts crumbling apart. That's acid. And it's funny to take a look at our collection in our rare book room, because we have books that go back to the 1500s, and I take care of the atlases. And we have atlases from the 1500s that have perfect paper in them, creamy white and still perfect. And yet books from the 1860s will look like they're 1,000 years old. The paper has turned brown and it's crumbling right out of the books. And it's because of the difference in the paper manufacture. So it's kind of ironic that the books published centuries ago will out-survive all the ones that are being produced today. And even if you buy a book that says that it's acid-free, it's not lignin-free. So it may be acid-free at the time of sale, but eventually the lignin will create the acid and it'll start the self-destruction process. So that takes care of it for having a look at some of the things that you can do to prevent damage from your books. Proper shelving and a good environment should keep your books going along for a good long time. Again, I thank the people who submitted photos, and I decided what to do based on those photos and the submissions that you brought in today. And we have a good example of the first kind of issue that I'm going to show you how to deal with. You remember the books with the broken joints? Here is a Bible in which the text block has broken out of the cover entirely. And I have seen this a lot. Okay, with city directories, those big heavy books, when they hit the ground, the text block goes in one direction and the cover goes in another direction. And it doesn't bother me at all, because I think it's a rather easy repair. In a library setting and in a permanent collection setting, I go way overboard on these. I simply rebuild the whole thing. You don't have to do that at home. It's not necessary for you to rebuild it in its entirety. This book, although it could be repaired, it does have these nice pages with these annotations on it that are probably very important to you, and you don't really want to mess with it. What I would do is I would have a professional rebuild this for it. And so it would preserve these here. It would get rid of most of the acid in it, and it could be something that you could pass down for generations beyond it. But this is the sort of thing that you could repair if it weren't terribly important to you. Let's say it were a cookbook or something like that. So generally speaking, you can find them. Some of these can be repaired. This one I thought might be able to be repaired at home. But when I look at it, this cover is extremely heavy, and it was held by only the leather cover, and the leather cover is not supposed to hold it together. You'll see today the books are not held together by the covers. It's another element in them. So this one here, people do repair these, and what they would do is they would just take care of these loose pages at the front. Even though they're somewhat brittle, there's still enough flex in them to go, and these things would have to be replaced. These sorts of these fancy papers and so at the front and the back, and they would create a new joint for it and put the cover back on so it would hold together for a very, very long time. If you did it yourself, you'd probably drive yourself crazy doing it because it's such a big book and it's hard, and it would be hard to handle this sort of a thing. A professional would have a much easier time with good equipment and a lot of experience behind them.
Would they be able to keep the integrity of that nice cover?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. The only thing that you would notice would be something along here. Okay, and even that can be repaired easily. So what I did, I took a book and I actually popped it out of its case. Okay, this sort of a thing here, where you have broken joints in it and you have the text block separate from it. And I already started work on it, on this brand new thing, and I'm going to show you what holds books together. It's not the cover. It's a piece of cloth. This is called scrim in bookbinding terms. And I use a type of cloth. I use linen cloth. It's cambric. It has a fairly tight weave, and mine just happens to be starch. You don't need anything that fancy. Really, you don't. But you could go to the fabric store and you could say, could I have a nice piece of fine linen like this here? And if you were to use it, here's, let me put this down on the table for you. I'm going to see what this looks like. Okay. I'm going to see if it's visible to you. Let me see on a darker background. Okay, if I put it on a darker background, you'll notice that this edge here is whiter than the rest of it. Okay, this edge is ever so slightly whiter. This is the edge of the cloth. And when you cut material, whatever cloth you're cutting for bookbinding, make sure that it runs parallel to where it's going to be in the book. So cut it parallel to that edge. Don't try to cut it the other way or cut it on a bias. It'll be all stretchy and that sort of thing. You want to cut it in a straight line like that. And this is what actually holds the book together. And unfortunately, and I'm not sure you can see this all that clearly, but, oh yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, if you look on the inside of the spine, there's this gauzy material. It looks like gauze. It has a great big open weave. You can see that there's some squares in it, and there's ragged threads there. It's nothing like this cloth that I showed you here. It's open. It's like a netting, like more than anything else. And believe it or not, that's what book manufacturers think is a good way or a good material to use in a book. And I have no idea why. It has no strength whatsoever, and it breaks over time. Something like this will last for decades and even centuries. And so if you're going to do a repair like this here, make sure that you use some kind of cloth. It might be a good idea to have a nice close weave like this here. Linen is ideal because it has a certain stiffness to it, and it's a nice dense weave if you get it in cambric. And what I did was, since this holds the book into the case, I simply cut a size of it that was about, 3/4 of an inch to an inch shorter than the length of the spine. I cut it so that I had about 3/4 of an inch on either side of it. And this is what I use, will actually hold the book into the case. And it's very, very easy to do this kind of a repair. So again, I looked at the spine. I measured 3/4 of an inch to an inch short of the spine, gave myself about 3/4 of an inch on either side, because this is a rather small book. If it's a bigger book, you would want more cloth on it on the side. And it's very easy to install this on a book. If you have your text block, in my office, I have a number of bricks that are wrapped in paper. One of my predecessors did it, because when you repair books, you want weights to hold everything down and hold it together. So I have a lot of them. So I just piled up 2 bricks on either side, and that created a nice little vise for me to hold the book upright while I applied this cloth to it. And applying the cloth to it is very, very easy. You simply brush glue on. I know when you use glue, most of the time it comes right out of the bottle, doesn't it? Okay, if you're going to do repairs like this here, put it in some kind of a small container. In my office, I use those 1-cup size snap top containers that people use for snacks and so on. And I keep it in there, and I use a brush like this one here. Notice it has a fairly wide, flat head like this, and the bristles are fairly stiff. This is stiffer than an artist brush would be, and these cost almost nothing. So while I was in the dollar store buying these books that I was going to take apart, I found these there too, 5 for $1 in a package. So you don't have to have the fancy camel hair one that I have in my office.
What kind of glue?
Okay, I'll get to that in just a second. Yeah, and that is a very good question. And I should be addressing that right now. I use what is a type of glue. It's a polymer resin. It's called polyvinyl acetate. You don't have to remember that. You don't have to go shopping for it, because almost every white glue out there, like Elmer's glue, is polyvinyl acetate, but it has additives to it. So since I'm in conservation and I have all these delicate things that I have to do, I have to tune the glues myself. So I can't use a commercial product like that that's set up for mass market use and for people to, put paper together very quickly or something like that. I have to have different drying times, different working times, and so on. But for the purposes of a repair like this here, a fast drying glue like Elmer's is absolutely great. And what I would do is I would squeeze the bottle out into a container so that you can have access to your brush and you can reach it very easily. If you're trying to squeeze something on it, then level it out with a brush, it's going to drive you crazy after a while. And so all I did to apply this was to simply applied glue to the section that it was, and I made little pencil marks on the cloth itself to show me where it would meet at the ends of the thing. And I could have even put little pencil marks here to show exactly where I should be applying the glue here. And then I simply put the cloth on top of it, and then I spend a number of minutes just rubbing it very gently and allowing the glue, use lots of glue in this operation here. Put a good thick layer of it on, because you want it to saturate the cloth and to hold it that way there. And when you do that, after you do that and you spent time, you're sure that it's fully adhered, don't push down too hard or you'll squeeze it out the ends and all over the place. But you just want it so it adheres nicely. And then you simply put it on a shelf like this to dry. Put it like on the edge of a table like this, and let it dry so the cloth is out. And in a day or so, it should be ready for you to.
So you put the glue on the linen?
No, on the book itself.
Okay.
Yeah, don't try to paint the cloth. You will have a tough time with that. Yes, it's easier to lay the cloth onto it than it is to try to apply it onto the cloth. Okay, so it's really a very simple operation, and this here, you've done most of the work that you have to do. Now, the next step is the tricky part, and that is, how do you connect these two things together? Okay, you now have the perfect setup for it, and when you do it, make sure that is the right side up in it, or you might be a little bit surprised like the Bible here surprised me. I was examining it, and it has the cover upside down, which is perfectly okay. But anyway, what you would do is you would use this as your guide. If you take a look at this here, the text block was broken out of it. The end leaves, or the paste down is what they technically call this, is already here. So you use this as your footprint for placing this in the right place. You make sure that the cloth is facing forward like this here, so it's not in the spine area, and you carefully place it on its footprint before you apply any glue whatsoever. Now, what you want to do is you want to glue this piece of cloth that you see here. You want it to connect to this edge over here, okay? Now that would be quite a trick, wouldn't it? But it's actually easier than you think if you think about it. What you're going to need is something that resists glue, some kind of sheet that resists glue. I have 100% polyester, or mylar is the trade name for it here, simply because I have a lot of this around. I use it to encapsulate maps and so on. But at home, you might have an old folder that's plastic like this. You might have wax paper in your kitchen. You might have parchment paper. I haven't tried parchment paper, but I'm pretty sure it would work. It should resist glue. And what you do is you need 2 layers of resist material. So the first layer is the one that you're going to leave in the book while it is drying. So for this purpose here, I've chosen the mylar for it. And for the application of the glue, to protect the mylar from the glue, you use a piece of paper that you're going to dispose. So you have 2 layers of resist materials here. And what you're going to do at this point here is to apply glue to this cloth. And you'll apply it quite generously because you want it to saturate the cloth, okay? And so you end up with, after you've done that, is you end up with a very sticky piece of cloth that is not going to stick to this leaf, and it'll only stick to this section of the leaf where it's going to stick. So after that, you would carefully close it, bring the cover all the way over the top of it, and hold it down, and you'd repeat the process on the other side. So it really is a very simple process. Let's review it again, and it only will take a second to go through it. Apply glue to the spine of the book, place the scrim on it like this, and after it's dried, place it where it's supposed to be in its footprint on the thing. Put a glue resist paper in there, or a sheet in there, and put a piece of paper that you're going to dispose after you apply the glue. And you apply a good amount of it, applying it only to this cloth. Don't let it go drip over the side here or go anyplace else. And once you've done that, you simply take out this paper and discard it, okay? And then you close the book and allow it to dry. And you do the same process on the other. Now,
would you let that dry for like a day, one side, and then do another side?
No, I would do both of the sides in one day.
Okay.
In one day. And you may wonder why I have a knitting needle. And I also wondered why I had a drawer almost full of knitting needles in my office when I took the job. And it's because of the French joint. You know this little groove that you see near the spine of a book? That's how these joints are set. And so one of the things that you would do immediately after you've closed the book is to put the knitting needle in there and just move your hand over to work, make sure that the glue has adhered. At work, I do all kinds of contortions to get this into a book press and try to keep the needles in it. You don't have to go through that much trouble. It's enough simply to make sure that you've checked this and you've pressed it down very tightly like this, and it should be perfectly okay. And you do it on the other side as well. And this is a number 3, and so if you have a knitter in your family or something, you don't have to run out and buy one. But it's that easy to do it, but it's not complete, because what would happen is you would have a joint showing in it. And I got this book off the library shelf. I refused to repair it when it first came to me, but in preparation for this demonstration, I went against my own advice, and I took this book that I have no business repairing, and no one has any business repairing a book like this. And I, in fact, did fix the text block in it. So it was broken out of its binding, and so I simply finished breaking it, and I did exactly what I showed you here. And this is the point that I've gotten to. You can see that cloth is on here. It's joined very, very nicely. This cover has not stuck to this page, and it would be a very easy thing to cover it up. And to cover it up, I simply took regular paper, cutting in a section that was 1 inch wide to cover this section here. Actually, I'll do it this way here. 1 inch wide, that's going to cover this section here. And let me see, 1/2 inch to cover this here. And that was simply, I do that simply to cover up that cloth section. And what I did is I folded it at the 1/2 inch mark like this here. And then if I were to install it into the book, and I would have no business installing it into this book here, what I would do is I would simply lay it down on a sheet of paper like this here with the fold side up, the sharp side of the fold up, and I would apply glue to it on this here so that I would have the whole thing covered. You don't need very much glue at all. It's just very, very lightly brush it on there. And then I would take it and I would install it like this. And what would happen is I would have a very nice, clean looking joint there, okay? But I have no business repairing this particular book, and I'll tell you why later on, okay? But anyway, that's the principle that you would use. You would simply create something that, and this does not actually hold anything. It's simply to cover that repair, that's all, and to give it a neat appearance.
And would you use that technique also if there was like a marbled end page that you wanted to retain?
No, I probably wouldn't. I have a number of atlases, rare atlases from the early 19th century that have these beautiful end papers in them, and I haven't decided exactly what to do. I may actually do the brutal and savage thing and put something over it rather than letting the book fall apart. I'd have to sacrifice it, and I have to see. It would depend on the atlas itself and how much it was worth. But these are very, very useful, and it really creates. It'll give you an
acid-free paper.
Yeah, this is actually just regular paper, so it's acid-free, and acid-free is acid-free when you buy it, okay? It would become acidic over time unless it's lignin-free, and you'd have to look for that if you're really interested in that sort of thing. But if you have an old book, there's always going to be acid present in it anyway, so you don't have to be too fanatical about that sort of thing. And if you put acid-free materials into an acidic book, the acid migrates. Okay, it simply goes from one element to another. And I've seen books where the covers are acidic, and so the end pages are going to be yellowed from the acid and brittle, and the interior pages where it hasn't gotten to yet are going to be white. Okay, so I wouldn't worry too much about it for home use, but I know if you want to preserve a book for a very long time, that it is an important thing. And with this one here, I probably would, and we will get to this in just a moment. So that's one type of repair. Another type of repair is damaged spine cover or exterior joint, and this is the example from Janice, right? You have a situation here, and I need to use this camera since they were kind enough to set it up for me, to show you that this book, which is in relatively good condition, has only this one issue. It has the spine has become loose from it, and this can be dealt with rather easily. And you know what I would do, Janice? I would take off this brown paper. This brown paper is acidic. This is like a grocery bag, is what it is. The spine inlay also has it, but it'll be okay. And let me see how good that. The book is actually very strong, so even though it's limp and it's falling, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with it. It's meant to be limp like this here and soft and open easily. But I would peel that off. I would leave these little end cloth things on it, and Oh yes, it'd be very easy to reinforce this. Just put a sheet of paper or something on the back of this to hold this flat, okay? And you can do that simply by putting a piece of Mylar on here, putting paper against it like this, and then dry it under weight. So you could get this looking pretty good, okay? And you would be ready for the next stage in this repair. Now, at work, I go through a lot more steps than I'm going to show you here. You don't have to do all of the steps that I do. I'm going to show you how you can actually fit a cover back on, or fit the spine, a broken spine back on. If it's hinged like this here, leave it exactly as it is. Leave it hinged like this because it'll make it easier for you to place it. If it has fallen off completely, you're going to have to do more work to it. But you have to do some prep work on the spine. If you take a look at the spine here, I've already done the work on it. Let's take a look at how a book should work. And let me see, can you see the end of the book? Okay, when I open up a book, watch what happens at the spine area. Do you see that? Okay.
On the lower.
There you go.
Okay, very good. Okay, here it is. Okay, that's where the camera is. Okay, you can see it now, the end of the book. Okay, watch when I open it. Do you notice that little spring that's opening up? That's called a hollow, and that is the spring that actually helps to close a book. And that happens naturally in binding books of the sort that I just showed you, that Bible. If that is all held together, the spine cover is as where it should be, and it has some kind of a spine inlay in it, it creates its own spring of this sort. And you can tune the paper to either have the book open flat and open easily, or you can actually tune the paper so it'll slam shut for you and you have to struggle to keep it open. So it's entirely up to you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a hollow and put it on the spine of the book. And creating a hollow is a very, very simple thing. Here is one that is not glued together. And we're going to deconstruct it and do it all over again. If you take a look at it, it is simply a sheet of paper. It's folded in 3 sections like this, and 2 of those sections are glued to each other, and the result is a hollow spine that you can use on that part of your book. So let me show you how I would make it. I use a T-square at work. I didn't bring the T-square, I just brought this little ruler here today because using a straight edge will make your folding a whole lot better. I know sometimes, you remember in elementary school you would fold your own paper and do all that sort of thing there. When you get grown up and you get paid to do this stuff, you start finding ways to make it a whole lot more precise than it was before. And what I would do to create a hollow is I would measure the spine of the book. So here's the spine of the book. I measured it. I found it was 1 1/8 inches, and I'm going to use that as my width. And I'd set my ruler here. I'd set my tri-square here, but I don't have the tri-square, so I just put this down. Put a straight edge or something along the area that's going to be folded. This way you'll get a really precise fold, and then you can simply use your thumbnail to bring the paper up like this here to create a good fold. Take the straight edge out and just gently fold it. You don't have to press it really hard at all. You don't want to squeeze it all the way down as if you were going to tear it apart or something. Just give that a bit of a fold down, and then fold it down and take your straight edge, put it against that edge, release that edge, and again, fold it like this, okay? And you created your second part of it. And the final step is, when it's all folded over like this, put your straight edge against it here and simply cut it at that point. If you have a rotary cutter, I know some of you who sew probably have one of those. I'm no good at those. I'm scared of those anyway. I use a surgical scalpel. And almost all of the cutting that I do in my work, I do with these surgical scalpels with these disposable blades on them. And you'd be amazed how quickly they get dull. They're intended to cut flesh, and I'm cutting paper and abrasive things like that. But that's how I do it, and that's why my work is really precise. I get a perfect cut every time, because I use a straight edge as a guide, and I use a very, very sharp instrument. So if you do that, you will end up with a hollow. And it's very easy to glue it together. The last two folds, simply apply. I'll show you this. Here's the one fold. There's another fold there. Simply apply glue to one of these, this surface here in the center. And when you've done so, and don't use very much glue, when you're just gluing two pieces of paper together, use very, very little glue. Otherwise, it'll warp, it'll curl, it'll do all sorts of awful things that will make you very, very unhappy. So, and then when you're done with that, simply fold it over like this here and smooth it out a bit. Don't squeeze it too hard, otherwise you will squeeze adhesive out of the end, and what it'll do is it'll seal this hollow. Okay, this hollow should be as long as your actual text, the spine of the book is. So if it were to go into this particular book, it would be this length here, from here up to here. Okay, and when you were ready to do it, you would take the part that is only one layer of paper, not the two layers of paper, one layer of paper, and that would be the one that you would adhere to the spine of the book. And again, just like installing the cloth onto the spine of the book, you would apply the adhesive to the book itself, and then you would set this in place. And it's just that easy. And what you then have is you have a perfect surface for attaching the spine to it. So you don't have to worry about having this reduce the functionality of your book because you've lost this hollow in it. You need this hollow. It is a spring. It's an essential part of the book. And unfortunately, as I say, these new books, they don't work the way they should. Okay, and then all you have to do this is simply to adhere this to it. If you wanted to, I started doing a little bit of coloring simply to reduce the contrast when I glued it on. I should have done it before I actually put the thing on. And you could do it, you can actually hide it so that you don't have to add anything else to it. This will be enough to hold it together. Now, you may decide that, or you may actually have a book that doesn't have a spine, and we don't have one. Someone was supposed to bring one, and they didn't bring it, which is perfectly okay, because I ripped the spine off one of the books and I discarded it, so it's not anywhere that I can find. And so let me show you how I would deal with that. You already know how to make a hollow. A hollow is an easy thing. It's simply a sheet of paper, the folds of which are equal in size, and they are the width of the spine of the book. So what I did is I created a hollow, and I already attached it to this here. So I'm ready now to create a covering that will cover the back of the book. And it's really very easy to do. I want to see which way you're reading things. Okay, yes. Okay, well, these numbers aren't very legible, but I keep my measurements really simple. And for this demonstration, almost everything has been 3/4 of an inch so far, and I'm keeping 3/4 of an inch, except I'm actually doubling it here. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting something that is going to cover this here, and it's also going to fold over on the inside here on the book itself. So what I need is I need enough material to cover this area here and to cover a certain amount of area here. And I've decided that 1 1/2 inches is plenty. You can make it as big or as small as you like, but that is a perfectly adequate number. And what I did was I cut a little tab out of the center of it that's 1 1/2 inches in from each side, which will be the width of the spine. So you do your calculations, width of the spine plus 3 inches, and you'll be able to go in 1 1/2 inches on one side, 1 1/2 inches on the other side, and you'll have something that will correspond to the width of this, okay? And so what you do after that is you make 2 little cuts in the end, and you glue down the little tab that is left there. And so what you're left with is you're left with something that you can put on your book. You can adhere to the spine, and you can then wrap around it and then eventually lock it inside. So let me just review this very, very quickly, what I have done here. I've taken cut a sheet of paper that is the width of the spine plus 3 inches, which makes it possible for me to go in 1/2 of an inch on either side, cut a line that's 3/4 of an inch into it. And oh, the length of this is, yeah, this is an important thing. You would take the length of it, this one is 9 1/4 inches, and you would simply add 1.5 inches to it. So you'd have a 3/4 of an inch on each side. 3/4 of an inch is my measurement, and it works out well for these things. It gives you enough overlap, it gives you enough material, and it's easy to remember. So this way here, it'll come out to be 10 3/4 of an inch, so you'll have enough room on this end for 3/4 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch to fold over and to create this little tab on the inside. And when you glue this little tab down, you might see here that I have little X's written in certain places on this here. There's an X up here, an X up here, and an X on the upper half of this tab. When I put glue onto this to apply it to the book, I don't want to put glue in those areas initially. Okay, just put glue in the wide open area so that you can apply it successfully. Now, what I did is I actually created one out of a sheet of paper that I have in my office. This paper is a little bit on the heavy side. You would pick whatever paper you wanted to. You could go onto Amazon and you could buy a piece of leather for like $8. They have them. There's a store on there. I think it's called Reed Leather. Just Google leather sheets, Amazon. It'll be one of the top things. They make these wonderful jackets, and the leather that they have left over, they cut into standard size sheets and they sell them. And they're quite inexpensive, and leather is a really wonderful material to work with. So avail yourself that. You can use anything that you like to cover the spine of a book. I use paper simply because, what do you think these are made out of? These books that I got from the dollar store, it looks like cloth on here, but it's simply textured paper. And paper is a good and a durable covering. I have books from the early 1800s in the collection that have paper covers on it, and they've held up very well over time. They even had leatherette back then as well, and that's held up well over time. And so applying it is a very, very easy thing to do. You would apply adhesive to the paper first. And to do that, this is the way I always do it. I put it onto a flat surface, and I get my brush, and it seems to have fled from me somewhere. Here it is, and get it from the bowl and apply it like this. And don't put a huge amount of adhesive on it. Just put a reasonable amount on it. You're basically gluing paper to paper. You simply, this is the way you install it would be, you would install the spine section first, okay? The spine section first, you would make sure that this is adhered nicely, and you would rub it lightly to make sure that it's adhered all over the place. And then you would slowly work it down over the edges, getting it in the joints on the side from the front to the back. And finally, when that is done, then you would finish smoothing it out the rest of the way. And when it's attached to the book, all you have to do to finish the process is to apply adhesive to this tab that's sticking up here, open up the back cover, and fold this down into the book with the adhesive on it, okay? And that creates it, and then you would simply close the book. You could do it on both sides on the back, or you could do the top first, or whatever works for you. Actually, I do the two back ones first, and then do the 2 front ones. And that way there, you'll have a completely covered spine that has a nice finish at the top, and you'll have a hollow that will actually function for you.
And you use knitting needle?
Yeah, you could, but you're actually going to be using your fingers here to smooth it out. But if you wanted to, just to make sure that it's in there, and you do have a joint in there, if you have enough material left on it, yes, you would use the knitting needle again to press it down into it. So that takes care of the repairs, and all those 3 repairs I think you could do at home yourself. And you don't need any really special or fancy materials. I may be using them at work, but I think cloth is cloth. It should be fine. I think a natural fiber's better because it'll kind of drink up the glue a little bit, whereas like polyester or something might resist the glue. But you know that gauze stuff that they use is plasticky too, so I'm not sure that even that matters all that much. And the choice of spine covers is up to you, and all these sorts of things you could do for yourself. Now, let's think about the books that you should not repair at home, okay? Now, let me just have a look at my notes, just make sure I'm where I should be. Okay, books that should never be repaired at home are books of great value. If a book is valuable, you have no business touching it. Okay, even if it is your own property, don't touch it. And before you fix a book, if you suspect that the book is valuable, how do you find out that it's valuable? One way is to go to an appraiser of books, but you can also simply do a search for the book online to see what it is worth. And you would be surprised at what you have. I inherited a number of books from my predecessors. They were given these books that should never have been repaired. And they knew that they probably shouldn't do it, or they might have started and they stopped them, and that I ended up with dozens of books on the shelf that I had to deal with at a certain point. And among them was this really undistinguished paperback from 1894. The cover was really crisp, and it had a weird title to it and so on. And I was about to rebuild it as a paperback, and I said, no, I better check to see what this book is. So I Googled the book, and I looked for a book of that sort that was for sale. And there was several copies for sale, and they were selling for $2,000 a piece. So, do you think I repaired that book? No, I did not. I simply left it alone because its condition prevented it from being repaired. And we'll get to that in just a second. And you may have a treasure of that sort too. You might have the first edition of a book. You might have a book that people just want, but it's out of print. And you'd be amazed at how much people will pay for a book if they can't get it. And prices are really crazy. A friend of mine who is a bibliophile who at work, she buys books all the time, and she sees this happen. She's looking for a book that everyone else is looking for. It'll go from $35 to $700. And then once everyone gets the books and the fresh supply comes out, the price goes back down again.
Yeah, I collect old paperbacks, not as old as the one you talked about, but books, I guess, from the 50s and 60s. And a lot of science fiction and mystery first editions were published in paperback, and then later were printed in hardback.
Right.
But the values of those paperbacks, and a lot of times the cover art makes them collectible, but there can be an incredible price spread depending on the condition of it. You might find the same book in one condition for $5 and in a very much better condition for $150.
Right.
And the problem is a lot of that's in the eyes of the beholder.
Right.
And you know, just to reinforce what you were saying, you don't know until you check.
Yeah, that's a good point. When you do look online to see what recent sale prices have been for them, compare the condition of that book to yours. If that one is pristine and yours is a bit on the shabby side, you shouldn't think of it as being as valuable as it is.
$75 in mint. This is probably worth $1.
Yeah.
But I was looking to replace it.
Mm-hmm.
$75. I like it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, look for them. Okay, any book that requires a complete rebuild, or something that's really quite skilled, or something that's big, like this big Bible here. This would need to be taken apart in order to do a proper repair. it'd have to be taken apart, the cover would have to be taken off the back, and it'd all have to be rebuilt, that section there. So it might be not something that you would want to do. And also the pages at the beginning, they're a little bit brittle, but they could actually be tipped in, and there's be a lot of judgment on the replacement of these materials and so on.
Do you have any idea of an estimate?
No, but you can find out from those websites. I have a resource that I'm going to email to Shannon, and she'll mail it to everyone who's responded to this here. 4 of the 5 professionals that I found online have websites that are very detailed, and they will give you estimates and sometimes even a good guess online for them. So you have an idea of the price right up front. So that's worthwhile doing. And also, common sense will tell you whether or not you should be doing a certain kind of repair. If it's a huge book, or the book is not in good condition, or something you'd have to put together. Someone submitted a photo of a Bible that was in pieces. I found it perfectly acceptable. That doesn't bother me at all, because I can put those together very, very easily. I can make it look like a brand new book easily. But the average person would probably have a hard time, because it takes a long time to learn how to line things up just right so that they fit together. You can fit them together, but it's be like if you were sewing or something without a pattern, it just wouldn't fit right and it wouldn't look right. Yes?
How do you handle, and this is common, what your ancestors have done to these precious items?
Okay.
The duct tape, the
Yeah.
masking tape,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, if you can remove it at all, do it. Okay, it's probably a good idea. In this case here, it's perfectly benign. Actually, the duct tape is in good condition. I've seen, but what happens with duct tape is, as the years go by, the adhesive dries out, and that's why a lot of paperbacks fail. Paperbacks, especially, they were experimenting with techniques in the 80s and the 90s, making books that were basically paperbacks in a hardback binding. They would simply embed the text blocks in a bed of adhesive, and now 40 and 50 years later, the books are falling apart in permanent collections like ours. So I'm taking them one by one and rebuilding them. But yes, you can undo these sorts of repairs and come up with something better. Okay, so if they covered the spine of this, and let's say the case of this was good, you would simply take this off, you would create a hollow, and you would use your own spine covering on it. Feel free to undo their repairs to it, but do preserve the things in it, like the priceless things like an ancestor's writing or something like that. You want to keep all of that stuff. Don't touch those elements of it. And if you have a book at which you can't repair without messing with those parts that are important to you, that's a good case to give it to a professional. And the final category is books that should never be repaired. And this book that I brought in today, and I said that I had no business repairing it, I had no business repairing this at all. But for this demonstration, I was willing to do it because it's an old periodical from 1926 that's now in the public domain. Believe it or not, we've been held hostage by Walt Disney's and Mickey Mouse. That's why the copyright is so distended, as it's just immoral. But anyway, these things eventually will be just digitized and discarded. There will be no of these old periodicals in libraries unless they have a huge budget and they have a whole team of conservators keeping things together. But let's return to this book and let's have a look at it. Now, if you look at this book, it doesn't look too bad now that I put it back together. And if I applied this little covering to the spine, it would look just great, wouldn't it? But I have no business touching that whatsoever, because if you were to examine the paper of it, take a look at the bottom. Can you see the bottom of the page here where I'm pointing? Watch what happens. Do you see that it's become disconnected?
Oh.
Has that torn? That is not a tear, people. That is a crack. This paper is brittle, okay? The paper is brittle, and so it is slowly turning to dust. And this is one of the stages in the life of pulp paper. It becomes dark, it becomes brittle, it starts cracking, and then it will eventually turn to dust. So what would happen if I attempted to repair this? If I were to glue this onto here, it would look pretty for quite a while. But if someone picked up this page and opened it, it would break right along this paper here. If you put a piece of tape onto something, you see a piece of tape up here. I've seen them on old maps. That's exactly where the tear is going to happen. That's where the break is going to happen. Now, it is not a sin to use tape on books, but you have to use the right type of tape. And that's how I'm going to end up with our session today. This, you should not put any tape on it. And let me just take a look at my notes. What I say about brittle books is waste of time, uphill battle, and it will simply promote more damage if you attempt to repair it. But if you have a book in fairly decent condition, in which the paper is very good, and let's say you have a tear on the page like that there is a type of tape. It is called document repair tape. That's the generic name for it. Document repair tape. They come in all different brands and different prices and so on. It's amazing you get the same product at so many different prices. Some you'll have to pay a fortune for in shipping and all that sort of thing. But anyway, shop around for it. You'll find it online. It's wonderful tape. It actually is on a backing. So let me just see where this tape is. Yeah, here it is. Okay. When you get it, it's on a backing, and you have to pull away the backing to expose the tape. And if you look at the tape, you can see that the tape is translucent, and it's very light. And it's wonderful because the adhesive, when it is new, it's actually repositionable. So if you put a piece in the wrong place, you can actually peel it off after a while. And actually, if you have really high content alcohol, like about 97 proof or so, or 195%, and a little bit of denaturing, you can actually lift it off with this. This is strong, but it's not stronger than your paper, because if I were to put Scotch tape on this repair here, and someone were using the book, it would tear right along where the Scotch tape was. But since this isn't as strong as the paper is, it's going to yield a little bit, and it won't generate a tear on its own. So if you're going to use tape, use it on the paper that's in fairly good condition, and use the right kind of tape. And that's all I have for you tonight. I'll take your questions from here on out. Yes?
When you're taping, do you tape just one side or do you tape both sides?
I usually just tape one side, okay? And take your time in placing the paper properly, because I just tore it there. And if you set it up properly, this is a dreadful tear. Okay, yeah. Make sure the paper is in its original position before you tape it down. Yes.
We were speaking earlier, and my advice for most people that when they come to the library, and I've learned so much tonight, but if they have something they just treasure so much, my advice has always been to invest in some kind of archival box.
Oh yes, that's exactly
it. I know he wants to show you. You can get these online.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me, Shannon. That's one of the reasons that I brought this here. When they brought this book to me for repair, and I refused it, and I do that a lot. I will not waste my time doing something that is not going to work out. This thing is going to turn into dust. It's already digitized someplace. We're going to be fine without it. So what I did is I said, okay, great, I'll make a box for it. I didn't buy this box online. I came up with this idea. Well, actually, we couldn't buy. We were in a purchasing freeze is what we have. And the city does that as a strategy so it can like clear its books and that sort of thing, and it inconveniences everyone. And I needed to make some boxes, and I was walking down this hall and I saw this pile of old file folders. I tested them. I got the ones that weren't acidic, and I simply made 5-sided boxes out of them. And I've used them also to make the kind of boxes that are called face boxes or archival boxes. They actually fold over and have little ties on them and so on. So what I did is I created a sleeve for it so that all the pages will remain together, and I can put it on the shelf like this. A patron can take it off take it out, use the book, and it can go back into here, and it'll last for many more decades in a box than it will out on its own. And you can create these on your own. You can design your own. I do my own because my mind just works that way. I can see in like 3 dimensions and so on. And so when I look at a sheet of paper, I can tell exactly how I have to cut it and fold it and so on to make it turn into what I want it to turn into. And you can also look online. There are patterns for boxes like this here. And this is a good storage solution for them. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, you've been very, very patient. You all stayed awake. I am so proud of you. Yes, question.
I had a Bible that I didn't want to attempt to repair, and there's a rabbi's wife in Arizona that does it fairly cheaply. She did it right now.
Okay.
Pretty quick.
Okay, good.
For the most part,
Google Rabbi Arizona book repair. Okay, or ask.
If I do not already have your email, stay long enough to give me your email, and I'll make sure that you get any information from Paul that is additional.
Yeah.
And I'll also post that, of course. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the rabbi.
Yes, question.
Is there anything you can do to stave off like foxing or like the spots that appear? Can you slow it down?
Yeah. If
Stick it in the freezer, what do you do?
If that's very, very interesting. Actually, foxing is created from a number of things. Sometimes it's just the ink in a book that will create that thing. I actually bought an 18th century Bible from a bookstore in a barn many, many years ago. And I brought it home, and I loved it because it had 100 illustrations in its 2 volumes. It was from 1784, and all these great masters' prints with these religious scenes in it. And it had foxing throughout it. It had, the plates on it all had this sort of weird, like brownish thing that was happening on it. I simply stored it indoors, and I stored it in dry conditions, and about 20 years later, I opened it up, and all of it had disappeared. So part of it may have something to do with how dry it is, but you can't reverse all of them. But that was apparently just some kind of mold that was active while it was slightly moist, and there might have been just enough moisture in the paper. But actual foxing is not something that you can actually drive out of a book. There isn't a process. The only people do it with sheets, like if they cut a plate out of a book or something. There are immersion processes that you can use to do it. They're not a good idea. You don't have the stuff at home to do it. And I know people, when I started this kind of work, I looked around to see what other people were doing, and I realized what they were doing was not what I should be doing. And one of them was when a person said, got a compliment from another person, boy, you did a good job with that bleach on that plate. And it looked good, but what it does to the paper is it destroys the paper. And a lot of those chemical things that you put onto it have crystals. They're made of something that's dissolved from crystals. So what's going to happen if any residue is left on the paper? These little tiny crystals are going to be on it. Crystals are abrasive, and they will cut into it, and they'll further reduce the integrity of it. So foxing is something that you have to live with. But I would say make sure your book is really dry. That's probably a good thing, and see what happens with that. But otherwise,
Is that what's on the inside where that leaf is on mine? On the
poetry
poetry book?
oh yes.
Is that what that is on there? Like where the leaf
Oh
is?
no,
You're telling me
this
to cut the leaf
this
out.
I didn't mention Adam's book. Adam brought this book from 1884, and I wanted to see it because it's really in very, very good condition. And I looked at it inside the book, and yes, there is a crime against books happening right here in these covers, and it has to do with a frontispiece. If you notice, it has brown marks on it. What do you think generated the brown marks on it? This little cover that is over it. And if you find these in old books, you have my permission to take them out, okay? Because this tissue paper is called interleaving or something like that, and is used to protect portraits in books. And this paper is usually very, very acidic. And I've tested it and I've noticed it. And I noticed that people, even in books of recent manufacture, they still use materials that are acidic. So remove this here, and that will prevent this from further discoloring. Okay? So if you find these in books, take them out. And Adam's book is very interesting because his book only has very minor condition issues to it otherwise. And one of them is this open joint in the front. And this is something that he would have to do using his own judgment for it, because I don't know if this book is valuable or not. You'd have to find out what it is worth. If it's valuable, you shouldn't touch it at all. Okay, but if it isn't, and you want to have it integral, and you want to have it all holding together so that you can use it, you could actually do this sort of a repair yourself. You would do it very carefully using a mild adhesive, as I told you. And you already know the technique of putting a resist sheet in there to keep these from sticking together. But it's a lovely little book. Any other questions?
Two questions.
Yes.
One, or one statement. The History of the Great War book that came out in like 1938 or something like that, because there was only one Great War then, but it has those papers in it, and they're still vacant, unfortunately, as you just said. The second thing is, what is foxing?
Foxing is usually, I'm not really sure what it is, and no one is really sure what causes it. Some people think it's a fungus. Some people think it's the ink. The ink in certain books rust for some reason. Yeah. I have old books that the text blocks where the printed area is all brown. It's all brown and crispy, and the margins are perfectly clean. And that's something that's caused by the ink. And other kinds of what they call foxing, because the term foxing doesn't really mean anything. It just refers to some kind of a discoloration in the book. It could also be something that's fungal or mildew, that sort of a thing.
Isn't it more common here in the South? Or would you say not? The reason is, I have a 1929 house. Mm-hmm. There's no getting it dry.
Right.
It's always moist. So there's a lot of foxing in my new book, my old books. Yeah.
Really? Okay, yeah. That's why I say that the miracle that happened with that Bible of mine, I think it was simply that I managed to dry it out. And I don't know what it was, but it was there. And I said, maybe someday I'd like to harvest those plates if they're worth anything and sell them or something like that. And I said, but it's such a shame that they're discolored. That I opened it up and all the stuff had disappeared and it was all clean and fresh looking. And so that could be it. So moisture is one of those things. And I'm glad that you testified to that, because they will believe me now that moisture is not good for books. So potted plants on the bookcase are a bad idea. Anything else? Yes.
What's the most challenging restoration you've ever completed?
Okay.
Good question.
Good question. Maps, certain maps I've had. Maps come to me mounted on something. Let's say this is a map. Mm-hmm. And when it's framed, it's usually attached to a board, and then it has a mat around the front of it. Mm-hmm. I've had maps that have had crisscross patterns of double stick tape on the back of them. Ooh. And so what I've done with it is it was like I had slides of this. I showed it for the Library Association. I did a program for them a few years ago. I was actually sliding in metal strips like this here and cutting the matting around the tape with a scalpel on the back. So the blade of the scalpel was just a hair's breadth away from it. And so getting maps out of those framing enclosures is a really challenging thing. But I've done so many of them, you couldn't possibly get the experience I have, because we have this huge map collection and we had to have them cataloged. And I was doing the conservation work as they were being cataloged, or before they were being cataloged and digitized. You can see all of our maps online from our catalog because of it. But anyway, I went through all of them, and I did over 1,000 maps in that project. And I found every condition issue under the sun, and you would be shocked to see how the crimes that people committed against maps. As far as books go, when a book is falling apart, it just makes me perfectly happy, because I know how to take it apart and put it back together and make it look like a brand new one, especially one that's closer to the present. Now, I do have a project coming up It's our $1 million atlas. We have a set of 11 atlases from 1662 through 1664, and they are worth today around $1 million. I saw a copy of it available a couple years ago, and it wasn't even as nice as ours, and they were asking $950,000 for it.
Wow.
Now, the materials in it are absolutely exquisite. The pigments are all these expensive pigments of seashells and semi-precious stones and stuff, real gold leaf inside it, and it's covered in vellum, which is a type of leather, and it's really dirty because it was stored in an old English manor house before it was sold. I think this English earl needed the money for the taxes. That's why it went to auction, and we were able to get it. One of our benefactors went to England, purchased it for us, and brought it back a number of years ago.
You should record that whole process.
Yeah.
That would
And-
be fascinating.
Anyway, but what is interesting about it is it does have the cover with all of these little cracks in the vellum, so it's going to be a challenge to find a way to make it integral again. And the edges of it, the corners of it are curled inward, and I can actually straighten those out for it. So I'm really excited about doing that sort of thing. The thing is, I just don't have enough time in the week to do all the things I do. I do a lot of programming. I've done 9 programs this year. 8 of them were brand new, so it takes a lot of time. So if I can clone myself, I can get it all done. But that's a good question. I wish I could show you my work because it really is amazing. And after it's done, I say to myself, how the heck did I do that? You know, because it seemed impossible at first. Any other questions?
I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you.
Knowing that we've got someone of Paul's caliber taking care of our precious valuables downtown. And I know that Paul does visit, there's some visiting hours that you can go and see what they do in the archives. That might be limited now with the way things are going, but plan a trip down there and see what they've got. In the open collection. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, and if you are downtown at all when the library is open, all you have to do is go to the library and tell the guard that you're interested in seeing the murals in Southern history, and you'll get to see our fabulous environment down there. It's one of the most beautiful public spaces in Birmingham, and it's spectacular. And we have it all thanks to the Roaring '20s, when people had a lot of money and the city of Birmingham had a lot of money, and it spent it on a good library.
Thank you so much for coming.
All right, thank you, everyone. It was such a pleasure.
I've got calendars here.
And I'm still available if you have